Hello Internet, and welcome back to part 2 of my introduction to using VMware's VMware Player desktop virtualization software. In part 1, we installed the software after downloading it from VMware's website, and we created a new virtual machine, a blank one with no operating system installed. But we went through the process of creating the VM and looking at some of its configuration settings, like its virtual hardware um, and some of its other features. So in part 2, we're going to take the VM we created, which is this one here called Windows 7, and we're going to install, surprise, surprise, Windows 7 on it, um, which is a pretty easy process. It's almost identical to installing Windows 7 on a new physical PC, but in some ways it's quite a bit easier because everything that you're doing is taking place just in a window on your host PC. So you can still, watch cat videos on YouTube and browse Wikipedia and learn a thing or two while the install is going on. Um, Virtual machines are very flexible and very configurable. And so as we go through this process, we're going to talk a bit about special things that you can do with a virtual installation of Windows 7 that you can't typically do with a physical installation. So let's get started. At the end of the last section of part 1, we talked a little bit about editing the virtual machine settings, and we're going to start by going back into those settings here and including our Windows 7 installation ISO image in our virtual machine's virtual optical drive. And the way that we do that is we select the type of hardware here, and we select Use ISO Image File, and we click Browse, and then we need to find my ISO file for Windows 7. I saved it on the desktop here, so all I'm going to do is select Desktop and select the ISO, and then hit Open. And as long as the path is correct here and the Connect at Power On option is checked here, that's really all we need to do. The virtual CD will be in the virtual CD-ROM drive or DVD-ROM drive when we start up the VM. So let's go ahead and hit play. And if you've worked with virtual machines for a while, this kind of loses its novelty, but it is kind of cool. And I just want to point out that as far as this operating system and at this point the installation process is concerned, it's really running on what it thinks is a physical computer. But of course it's running just inside a window on my desktop here. I mean, that's really the triumph of virtual machines, or one of many, is that it completely recreates what a piece of software would expect to find on a physical computer. And in part 1 we looked at memory and virtual CPUs and all the other features that make a VM look and act like a real PC. So we'll kind of try to hold that novelty as we keep going through the process here. For the most part, the process is just the same as installing Windows 7 on a real PC. You choose your language and your currency and your input method, and unless you have something really advanced or specific you want to do, you just kind of walk through the steps here. Windows, of course, has gotten easier and easier to install since I started using it way back in the Windows 3.11 for workgroups days, and on through the 95, 98 series, and then into XP and 7. I've installed Windows 8 a couple of times, and it's even easier, really, except they try to make you sign up for a Live or a Microsoft online account nowadays. So in some ways, I think 7 is really the pinnacle of the whole process, of the whole Windows line, at least up till now. Anyway, enough about me. So we're going to look through, and at this point it doesn't really matter what edition of the operating system we want to choose. I don't have a CD key for this specific install, so we're just going to walk through the install for Windows 7 Enterprise. And so we select Enterprise and click Next. Just like with VMware Player itself, we need to agree to Microsoft's terms and conditions here of using their software. I'm not going to read them all. I never have. I encourage you to read through them if you're curious about legalese and what it really means to run an operating system from a legal standpoint. But we're just going to accept them and hit next. And we're doing a clean install, which is the same thing as a custom install. It's not really advanced, although it's marked that way. We only have one hard disk as far as the virtual machine is concerned. It's our 25 gig virtual disk that we created in part 1. So I'm going to select that and hit next. And that's kind of all you really need to do. Like I said before, if you've ever installed Windows 7 before on a physical PC, it kind of does everything for you. We made all the tough choices there, and now we're just going to wait for Windows to expand, install, update, and complete its installation. To save a little time, I'm going to stop the video for now, and I will pick it back up the next time Windows prompts me for any information or any other interactive step. So pause for now. And we're back. Alright, so the Windows installer did its thing. It finished installing the operating system, rebooted twice, I think, and left us at the kind of last stage setup prompting for creating a user and logging into the virtual machine for the first time. So I'll just create a user account called user, and my PC name is fine, I suppose. And a password, I'll do the old one-handed standby here. And for a hint, my usual single space. And it wants a product key. I don't have one, like I said, for this installation, and that's okay with Windows 7. It gives you kind of a grace period. So I'm just going to say skip. And I am going to use recommended update settings because it's easier. I am in the central time zone. Date and time are correct. And at this point, they want you to choose what type of network you're on. If you choose public, it's probably the most secure by default. Then you can kind of choose what types of connections and services you want to enable after the fact. So I'll just choose public. And Windows finalizes everything it needs to do. And at this point, we have kind of a fully operational Windows 7 PC. Once we get in here, I want to kind of take a look and compare the virtual hardware with the physical hardware, just for fun, just out of curiosity, and to kind of see that correlation. So while that's loading up, I'm going to start the task manager here and set that off to the side. Move this a little bit. And so you can see, if we find the VMware Player process here, so it's this guy and this guy. And we can take a look at how much memory it's using and its CPU usage and all that sort of thing. As you can see, it's not really using a whole lot of system resources at this point, which is pretty cool. But you can see, we didn't compare this to earlier, but you can see that Windows is now using, well, there's a total on my host operating system of 4.4 gigs in use. And I know I'm not using that much on anything other than VMware Player. And if you'll remember, we configured 2 gigs of RAM to our virtual machine. And if we go ahead and look in our system settings here, we're going to see that that is still the case. And so here we go, 2 gigabytes of memory installed. And so that's a pretty good chunk of what's being used here over on our host. So it's cool. I mean, it really is just a piece of software. This whole operating system is running in our VM as a piece of software. I think that's pretty cool to sort of appreciate. So anyway, that kind of concludes our installation process here. The only other thing I really wanted to show is how to install VMware Tools. VMware Tools is sort of a collection of, I guess you could call them drivers and optimizations for the guest operating system running inside of a VM. And actually, VMware Player is really good about this. Whoops. They prompt you. It's kind of hard to see because I have my screen cut off a bit here, but they do prompt you to install VMware Tools. And I think we can get to the same thing if we go to, let's see, Manage, Install VMware Tools here. So it's on Windows, it's a pretty automated process. It's going to download the tool pack, it's going to install it for us, and then it's going to prompt us to reboot the guest operating system, to reboot the VM. Tools does quite a few things. The ones that you'll really appreciate as a desktop virtualization user is that it makes mouse integration much more slick. It's much easier to move into and out of the VM without having to like click or press the old left control and alt hotkey combo. And it also improves the graphics performance in VMs. It also makes it much easier to resize VMs to sort of fit whatever application you're running, or to take over the whole desktop or not. It does more than that too, but that's where it really shines. And while this is finishing, I'm going to pause the video so we don't run out of time here. But rest assured that it's just doing its thing. It's all pretty much automated, so as soon as we get prompted for something else, I will restart the video. Alright, so Tools finished downloading, and we can close this window. The way it works is it actually downloads sort of an ISO, just like our Windows installation media, and it automatically mounts it to the VM. So all we need to do is run through the ISO-based installer for Tools, and this takes just a few seconds, really. While that's happening, let's see what else can we take a look at here. I'm going to close the comments down here. There it goes. So I'm just going to click next through the install here. I think typical is fine. Again, we're kind of shooting for the bare bones, or the most commonly used parts of this whole package. So we'll just pick typical. It'll install the package for us, and when it's done, it's going to prompt us to restart. And once it's done, we have a fully functional, and in fact actually quite a bit enhanced virtual machine running Windows 7 and ready to do whatever we want with it. I'll just let this finish, and then I will pause the video while it's rebooting to save us a little bit of time again. And then the last thing to do is just kind of check out how we know Tools is running, and a couple of the extra added features that it provides. Actually, this is taking a little longer than I remembered, so I'm going to pause the video here. Alright, so VMware Tools finished installing and immediately prompted me to reboot. That's the only choice I've made since. And it booted right back up to the login screen. If you'll see now, when I want to increase the size of my desktop, I can do that dynamically, which is not something that was really able to be done before. It's maybe hard to appreciate the other benefits through a video, but once you start using VMware Player, you'll really notice that with Tools installed, it's just a lot snappier all around. It just feels like you really have full control and real-time interaction with the VM. So at this point, you'll just have to take my word for it. The other thing I wanted to show was that that the Tools indicator is installed here, and that's kind of the last thing you need to know to show that you are up and running with your new VM. So if you look in the system tray, you'll see VMware Tools right there. And that's really all there is to it. You have a Windows 7 VM and you are good to go.